Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Institute for Work and Health's monthly speaker series presentation. My name is Arif Jetta, and I'm a scientist at the Institute for Work and Health, and I'm also a co-chair of the Institute's speaker series sessions. I'm delighted to have you all here today and to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Kathleen Dobson, who will be speaking today on the role of persistent pain in work absence, health, and employment after a disabling work-related injury. A couple key housekeeping notes before I introduce Kathleen and provide you with a sense of her bio. The first is you'll notice on the right-hand bottom side of your screen that there is closed captioning, and that is available for you to use. So please feel free to click on that button if you require closed captioning. We will be using the Q&A function. So if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. The chat function will be disabled for today's speaker series talk. And lastly, I just wanted to remind folks on this call to subscribe to the Institute for Work and Health's newsletter, and Sabrina, who will be manning the chat, will post it for everyone to click on the link and sign up for the Institute's newsletter and where you can get updates on new events. And lastly, if you do have any questions or concerns, feel free to send Sabrina, who's typing in the chat function, your question, and she can help you with any logistical issues you might have. Okay, so I'm really excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Kathleen Dobson. Dr. Dobson is an associate scientist at the Institute for Work and Health, and she holds a PhD in epidemiology from the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Her current areas of research focus on the economic consequences of mental illness and how experiencing work-related injuries impact health and employment outcomes. In today's presentation, Dr. Dobson shares findings from a study of Ontario workers experiencing a work-related injury or illness, focusing on the prevalence of persistent pain and its association with return to work outcomes. Kathleen, we're really excited to hear from you today, and I'll now hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Arif. I really appreciate the introduction, and I really appreciate everyone who's tuned into the call today. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are today. I'll be speaking, as Arif mentioned, about the role of persistent pain in work absence, health, and employment after a disabling work-related injury. So today, I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement, that we wish to acknowledge this land on which the Institute for Work and Health operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So for the work that I'll be discussing today, I would like to acknowledge the funding and support from the Ontario Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, who provided grant funding to conduct this study. So I'm going to start today with a question, and no, you don't need to type anything in the chat or the Q&A, and it's not a pop quiz, but just to get us all thinking this morning. On your screen, you will see 10 hypothetical workers who experienced a work-related injury. My first question for the morning is, how many of these workers out of 10 do you think experienced pain after their work-related injury? Got your answer? Well, this one's a bit of a trick question because it might be all of them. I don't know about you, but any injury I've had has typically hurt a little bit after and has been associated with a little bit of pain. But my next question is, how many of these workers do you think experienced pain a year and a half or 18 months after their work-related injury? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. The Institute has published a study in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine on the impact of persistent pain on work absence, health status, and employment after a disabling work-related injury or illness. A link to the study, which is open access, so that means it's free for anybody to read and open to anybody to read, as well as a link to an At Work article that the Institute of Work and Health has published on the study, will be linked to you in the chat momentarily. So to provide a background, let's get established on kind of the importance of work-related injuries. Unintentional injury is a leading cause of death and disability among working age adults in Canada and in other similar societies. About 1 in 6 injuries that require medical attention are caused by work exposures. And 35% of work-related injuries or illness results in periods of disability or work absence. And we know when individuals have to take time off of work, it reduces the likelihood that they'll get back into the workforce, which causes strain on workers, workplaces, and our economy in general. Now, when it comes to pain, acute pain may follow an injury. Think of the first question I had put up. And pain in the acute phase can be of low, moderate, or severe intensity. Chronic pain, however, as defined by the Canadian Pain Task Force, is pain of moderate to severe intensity. It can be recurrent or persistent. It lasts at least 3 months after a work-related injury and is most of the time accompanied by functional impairment. And an important distinction about chronic pain is that it cannot be better described by an alternative medical diagnosis or other condition. Now, when it comes to chronic pain in the Canadian adult population, about 19% of Canadian adults report chronic pain. And of these individuals, about 5% report no activity restrictions due to their pain, 10% report some activity restrictions, and about 4% report significant activity restrictions associated with their chronic pain. Now, when it comes to chronic pain among individuals who experience a work-related injury, before doing the study, we didn't know too much about it. A lot of information is available about acute pain after work-related or injury in general, but we didn't know too much about what happens to pain after some time has passed since the injury has occurred. So that's what drove our research questions for this study. The first question we answer is, how prevalent is persistent pain 18 months after a disabling work-related injury or illness? And the second question is, among workers who have a disabling work-related injury, how does persistent pain impact health, length, and cost of a disability leave? So to conduct this study, we used data from the Ontario Life After Workplace Injury Study, or OLAWI for short. The purpose of this study is to describe the long-term outcomes of workers who had a compensation claim for wage replacement benefits due to a physical injury or illness that occurred at work. And for folks who aren't from Ontario, the place that we received these workers for our study who had a compensation claim for wage replacement benefits was from the Ontario Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, or WSIB for short. And the Ontario WSIB covers medical care services and wage replacement benefits for workers whose recovery from a work-related injury or illness requires an absence from work. So to begin recruitment for the sample, roughly just under 10,000 randomly selected eligible WSIB claimants were collected from June 2019 to March 2020. And these randomly selected eligible claimants had disability leaves of varying durations. And it's important to note that their injury date occurred January to October 2018, so about 18 months before the study occurred. So of these 9,754 individuals, about 2,816 were reached by the WSIB to tell them about the study and to gauge their interest in consenting to participate in the study. Of these individuals, about 1,674 consented to be contacted by telephone survey interviewers, and about 1,132 participated in this interview and comprised the OLAWI cohort. Now, a unique feature of this cohort is that we actually oversampled individuals who had longer wage replacement duration claims. Most claims that occur are less than 3 months in duration or short duration. And for this group, we had about 358 participants in the study. Our second group, individuals who had a claim about 3 to 12 months or medium duration, there were about 374 of these participants. And for participants who had a long duration claim of 12 to 18 months, there were 400 individuals who participated in the study. So the study measures that we used in our present study were drawn either from WSIB administrative records and an interview administered telephone questionnaire 18 months after the initial injury occurred. And important to note is 94% of the claimants who participated in the study consented to linking their survey responses to their administrative records. So this leads us to our first research question. How prevalent is persistent pain 18 months after a disabling work-related injury or illness? So to define persistent pain, we used responses from 2 pain questions in the telephone interview. The first question asked about pain interference. During the past 4 weeks, how much did pain interfere with your normal work, including both work outside the home and housework? And all but one OLAWI participants responded to this question. Of individuals who responded, my pain interfered at least a little bit, they were then asked about pain intensity. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate your pain due to your injury at the present time? That is right now, where 0 is no pain and 10 is pain as bad as it can be. And about 878 individuals responded to this question. So from these 2 questions, we created 3 different persistent pain groups. The first group, no persistent pain, respondents had to report that their pain did not interfere with any normal activities. So the answer to the first question. Our second group, mild persistent pain and functional impairment is likely unlikely. These individuals either reported their pain interference was a little bit, or their pain interference was moderate, and they had to have a pain intensity score. So the answer from the second question of less than 6 out of 10. And for our final group, was severe persistent pain, functional impairment likely. And these individuals either reported a pain interference of quite a bit or extremely, or a pain interference of moderate with a pain intensity of greater than 6 out of 10. So from these 3 groups, we found that about 254 individuals met the criteria for no pain, 479 met the criteria for mild persistent pain, and 398 met the criteria for severe persistent pain. But as I had mentioned, we had oversampled individuals with medium-term and long-term wage replacement durations. So when we weighted our sample to represent the overall claimant population in Ontario, we find that about 30% of participants fall in the no persistent pain group, 45% fall into the mild persistent pain group, and 25% fell into the severe persistent pain group. So just to understand a little bit about who is making up these pain groups or the participants in them, when we look at age, we found that in the no pain group, the average age was about 44, and this was about 4 to 5 years higher in the mild and severe pain groups. When it came to female sex, we found that a greater proportion of women were in the mild or severe pain groups compared to the no pain group. When it came to the industry that an individual was working in at the time of claim, generally there weren't too many differences in the distribution of industries, although a slightly greater proportion of individuals in the 2 pain groups were working in manufacturing at the time. When it came to the nature of the injury, we found that about half of participants in all of the pain groups had a sprain, strain, or dislocation. And when it came to the prevalence of chronic conditions before the injury occurred, at least 10% of the sample reported at one of the following chronic conditions: back problems, arthritis, migraine, mood disorder, or high blood pressure. Although important to note that those in the mild and severe pain groups generally had a greater proportion of participants experiencing these chronic conditions. So now that we've answered our first question, it leads us to our second. How does persistent pain impact health, length, and cost of a disability leave? So the disability claim and return to work factors that we were interested in looking at for this question was first, wage replacement duration. And again, breaking this down into the 3 categories of less than 3 months, so a short duration, 3 to 12 months, a medium duration, and 12 to 18 months, a long duration. And then from the WSIB administrative records, we were also able to look at total number of loss of earning days, total amount of loss of earning benefits, and total amount of healthcare expenditure benefits associated with the claim. This table shows the return to work and recovery status at 18-month follow-up for all respondents in the OLAWI cohort, and then stratified by the various pain groups. So when we look at 18 months, what their current employment status was, we found that about 65% of individuals in the no pain and mild pain groups were back at work working with the at-injury employer. And when we look at the proportion that weren't working, it was about 16 to 18%. Now, looking at the severe pain group, so the column on the very right, we found that only 55% of individuals were back at work with the at-work injury employer, and 33% were not currently working. When looking at the proportion of participants using WSIB services at the time, so at 18 months, about 4% were currently using them in the no pain group, 15% were using them in the mild pain group, and 36% were using them in the severe pain group. So here we see a gradient effect depending on the level of persistent pain. Now, when we look at our 4 outcomes of interest, benefit duration, loss of earning benefit duration, loss of earning benefit, and healthcare benefits, again, we're seeing a gradient effect that the increasing in pain, the longer the benefit duration, and the increased cost of the benefit claim. So to do a more detailed and robust analysis on this, we use some regression methods. So for the association between persistent pain and duration of wage replacement claim, we used a multinomial logistic regression. And for the associations between persistent pain, loss of earning, and healthcare benefits, we used a linear regression. Both of these analyses were adjusted for age, sex, nature of the injury, and prior chronic conditions. And although I won't be showing them here, I would like to note that we did explore to potentially identify sex differences in these associations, although results were similar for men and women. So I'm presenting the pooled results for both today. So this figure is going to show the association of persistent pain in wage duration or benefit duration using a reference group of less than 3 months. And you'll see on the x-axis or the horizontal axis, I have odds ratio values that can go from 0 to 15 or really infinity, but for the purposes of today, they go to 15. And you'll see I have a dotted line on the number 1. So if our estimate crosses this line of 1, this suggests that there's no difference in wage replacement duration between pain levels. And our pain levels that we're comparing is mild to no pain and severe to no pain. If the odds ratio falls on the right-hand side of this one, this suggests that longer wage replacement duration is more likely among higher pain levels. So to explore the association between persistent pain level and wage replacement duration of 3 to 12 months versus less than 3 months, for the mild versus no pain comparison, we found that those experiencing mild persistent pain have 1.3 times greater odds of having a claim duration of 3 to 12 months versus less than 3 months. And you can see the little sticks or confidence intervals coming out from our blue effect estimate do cross that line of 1. So this suggests that there's no statistical difference between mild pain and no pain on having a claim duration of 3 to 12 months. However, we do see a statistically significant association for severe pain compared to no pain. Those experiencing severe persistent pain have 2 times greater odds of having a claim duration of 3 to 12 months versus less than 3 months. Now, when we explored this association of persistent pain in wage replacement duration of 12 to 18 months versus less than 3 months, we see a stronger association occur. So those experiencing mild pain versus no pain have 3 times greater odds of having a wage replacement duration of 12 to 18 months. And for those experiencing severe pain versus no pain, the odds are about 8.5 times greater of having a wage replacement duration of 12 to 18 months versus less than 3 months. And for the non-epidemiologists in the room, when we see an odds ratio that's 8, 9, or 10, that suggests that it's a really strong magnitude of an association. So this association between severe pain and wage replacement duration of 12 to 18 months is really strong. Now, moving on to our other 3 outcomes, this table shows the effect estimates for the total number of loss of earning days total amount of loss of earning benefits, and total amount of healthcare expenditure benefits, again, using the comparisons of mild pain versus no pain and severe pain versus no pain. And these effect estimates are adjusted for age, sex, nature of the injury, and prior chronic conditions. And if the value is bolded, that suggests it's statistically significant. But to walk us through this, for total number of loss of earning days, those experiencing mild pain versus no pain on average had 11% greater number of loss of earning days. And for severe pain, it was about 51% greater number of loss of earning days compared to no pain. Now, extending to our last two outcomes, for those experiencing mild pain, on average, their loss of earning benefits were about 13% greater than those experiencing no pain. And for severe pain, it was about 48% greater. And lastly, extending this to the total amount of healthcare expenditure benefits, those experiencing mild pain, on average, had healthcare expenditure benefits 48% greater than those who had no pain. And for severe pain, those who their healthcare expenditure benefits were on average about 126% greater than those experiencing no pain. So I appreciate your patience in walking through this table with me. I find sometimes talking about effect estimates and percentages can be a little confusing. So I would like to put this in a hypothetical context. Let's say we have an individual who is male, he's in his 30s, his work injury was a sprain, strain, or dislocation, and he had no prior chronic health conditions prior to his injury. Let's say his loss of earning duration was about 55 days. The benefit amount was about $3,200, and the healthcare benefit amount was just under $1,500. If we take an individual with the same profile who had mild pain, on average, his loss of earning duration days would be 6 days greater. His benefit amount would be $400 greater, and his healthcare benefit amount would be $700 greater. Now, extending this to the same male, 30s, has a sprain, strain, or dislocation injury, and had no prior chronic conditions before his work-related injury, his loss of earning duration in days would be 28 days greater compared to the man with no pain. His loss of earning benefits would be about $1,500 greater, and his healthcare benefits would be about $1,800 greater. So again, this goes to show that the gradient effect that we're seeing as pain levels increases, length of loss of earning benefits increases, as well as the amount and healthcare expenditure benefits as well. So I threw a lot of numbers, graphs, and pictures and tables at you. So I'd like to now place these findings into context. So to go back to our first question, how prevalent is persistent pain 18 months after a disabling work-related injury? Well, in our study, we found that 70% of workers experienced some level of persistent pain 18 months after their work-related injury, with 25% of participants reporting they were experiencing severe pain 18 months after their injury. For our second question, among workers who have a disabling work-related injury, does it have an impact on health, length, and cost of disability leave? And by does it, I mean, does persistent pain? And the answer is yes. And what we're seeing is a dose response. The more severe the pain, the longer and more expensive the wage replacement claim is. So to place these findings into context, in our study, we saw that the prevalence of severe persistent pain is 6 times higher than that of the Canadian adult population. And again, it's important to keep in mind, although our analyses did weight the sample to represent the overall claimant population in Ontario, our study design did oversample longer claims, so these might be more complex and severe injuries. Secondly, our findings suggest that persistent pain of severe intensity arising from a work-related injury is impeding the ability to return to work. And that goes back to that statistic that 33% of participants in the severe pain group were not currently working 18 months after their work-related injury. And lastly, important to note that prior chronic conditions, so a potential other source of persistent pain, it didn't attenuate our association of interest between persistent pain and return to work outcomes. So this suggests that the associations that we're finding, we have confidence that they're true, and we have confidence in the magnitude or the size of these effect estimates. Now, there's a few limitations to keep in mind about our study, so places that bias may arise. You might have heard me saying persistent pain a lot, and that's how we defined our pain exposure. But the way that we define pain in our study doesn't exactly equal the definition of chronic pain. So it's possible that the number of participants reporting persistent pain might be a little overestimated. Secondly, many of the measures in our study came from a self-reported survey, which may lead to measurement bias. Third, as you might recall, only 94% of participants agreed to link their survey information to their WSIB administrative record. So this resulted in a little bit of missing data on loss of earnings and healthcare benefit amount. And although we used a multiple imputation technique that we think is quite robust and we have a lot of confidence in, this might be another place where bias might arise in our study. And lastly, it's important to recognize that our study sample did not include workers who had a psychological related workplace injury or illness, or Ontario workers who experienced a work-related injury at a workplace that wasn't entitled to provincial WSIB coverage. So after the study, we recommend that subsequent studies be studied in these populations as well. So now that we've come to the end of this study, what should happen next? Well, when it comes to further research we're conducting in the OLAWIS study, we're exploring how persistent pain influences the onset of chronic conditions after the work-related injury. So that's in the pipeline. Stay tuned for that. And we also suggest that this field of research continue to conduct longitudinal follow-up of pain after a work-related injury. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's been a lot of work done focused on the acute period after the work-related injury, but understanding the trajectories of pain after the injury is important to further the field and uncover further associations in the return to work process. Additionally, we also suggest that exploring the role of healthcare access and healthcare use in the association between persistent pain and return to work outcomes might be a modifiable place in the return to work process that we can help these individuals. So definitely further research is required there. And lastly, our study findings really bring light to the importance of awareness about persistent or chronic pain in the population of workers who experience a work-related injury. We don't want these workers recovering at home until they're 100% better, although that would be ideal. It's really important to get these workers back to work when they're ready. And this really highlights the importance of accommodations for workers who are experiencing persistent pain when they go back to work and potentially modifying some of their job duties so that they can go back to work. And with that, I'd really like to thank you for your attention today. Again, my name is Kathleen Dobson, and my email is up here in case you would like to talk offline. But for now, again, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm excited to have a conversation.
Fantastic presentation, Kathleen, and thank you so much for sharing this interesting research with us. So we have a number of questions in the Q&A, and I encourage others to also place some questions in the Q&A, and we'll try our best to pose as many questions as possible to Kathleen. But before we get to some of the questions from the audience, I guess I wanted to pose one question to you, and that's on the role of the work context. And so you highlighted some descriptive data showing that workers who are based in manufacturing types of jobs had more persistent, severe pain. And so I guess I wanted to have maybe you comment on the role of the work environment and maybe thinking about what role might it have in this some of the findings that you've presented today, and what role might the work environment have in terms of return to work for workers with persistent pain, and what types of messages might be important to highlight with regards to this concept of the work environment?
Yeah, thanks, Arif. That's a really great question. So the first thing I'd like to say in our study is that when we adjusted for the type of industry a participant was working in during their work-related injury, we didn't find it actually attenuated our associations of interest. And that might be because this measure is quite a high level and pretty crude. So it's definitely an area of further research. But when it comes to the role of the work environment in getting workers back at work, understanding what can be modified in it is a really important thing, because again, we want to get workers back to work, and although they might be experiencing some level of pain, this might suggest that they can't go back and do what they were doing before. So when it comes to the psychosocial or overall work environment, physical strain at work is one measure. So if someone was having a really physically demanding job before their work-related injury, understanding how we can reduce those demands so an individual can go back to work in their fullest capacity is really important.
Great, thank you so much. So our first question is with regards to selection bias. And so one participant wants to know about the representativeness of the participants in this study and the ways in which you accounted for potential selection bias, given that this was a selected sample and you oversampled certain characteristics in your sample.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd like to again emphasize that we did oversample individuals who had either a medium-term claim or a longer-term claim, so claims between 3 to 18 months. And that's actually really important in this body of literature because there's not a lot of information on these lengths of claims and the outcomes these individuals experience after their work-related injury. And again, to go back to the point that most claims that occur are less than 3 months in duration. So the fact that we had these individuals actually kind of helps the selection bias area, and that we're actually covering a broader range of individuals experiencing work-related injuries. And to address the selection bias, we did explore, again, reweighting the sample to make it a representative sample or distribution of claimants in Ontario. So that's some of the ways that we address that.
Great, thank you so much. Another participant on the call wants to know more about the measurement of pain in the study, and they're noting that there's a subjectiveness to pain, and obviously this was a self-report study, and so maybe you can elaborate on the measurement tool that was used and how the subjectiveness of pain is captured within that tool.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the unique aspects about working on this study is actually before we started, we placed a lot of time and thought into what is chronic pain or what is long-term pain. So we dived into the literature and found actually very heterogeneous definitions of it. So from the get-go, although again, there's organizations like the Canadian Pain Task Force who have put together some beautiful documents and research trying to quantify what chronic pain is, there's a lot of definitions and a lot of differences in the literature. And so when it comes to how we asked about persistent pain, again, we didn't have all those criteria about the recurrence or persistence, how long has it been occurring, although again, we asked about pain 18 months after the work-related injury. Our definition had to be changed slightly, and what we called pain had to be changed slightly. So that's why we went with the persistent instead of the chronic. And when it comes to the questions we used, these are some of the most used and common questions used in self-reported pain literature, as well as by clinicians. So from there, we know that our measures have a lot of face validity. So, so again, just to kind of wrap up that question, and I'm happy to elaborate on it. The definition of chronic pain can be quite broad. It would have been great if we had additional measurements in our data, and we really tried the best that we could with it. And also when it comes to the subjectiveness of pain, everybody's experience is slightly different, and of course that measurement bias is in the definition.
Great, thank you so much for answering that question. Somewhat similar, another participant asked about pain catastrophizing, and to what extent might that have been included either in the measure or as a variable that you controlled for, and if not, what implications might this concept have within the framework of your findings, if any?
That's a fabulous question. So the easiest way to answer that is we didn't have a measure about if individuals were pain catastrophizing. So that we didn't account for that in our study. But if individuals were pain catastrophizing, we would have a greater proportion of individuals in the mild and likely the severe pain group. And if that's the case, our results might be a little overestimated.
Okay, great. So we have another participant who kind of had a reflection based on some of the findings that you presented, and their reflection kind of highlighted that perhaps many workers will re-enter the work environment and continue to have persistent pain, and meaning the cost then, or the burden of this issue then falls on the worker and not on the employer. Can you maybe speak to that observation and maybe thinking about what it might feel like for that worker to kind of come back to work, but still be in a state of persistent pain?
That's a great reflection, and I'll try to answer or reflect on it to the best of my ability. As Arif mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, a lot of my research is conducted in populations with mental illness, which are invisible illnesses. And pain is kind of the same way. It can be quite isolating to be experiencing it, but not have the people around you really understand. And so that itself is a burden for workers. And when it comes to going back to work and having the burden of managing it, I think this is a place that it's really important in the return to work process, where the worker talks with their employer or their return to work case manager to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing and I need help with it. And I potentially want to go back to work, or I'm not ready, and how to really tailor that part of the return to work process to the worker. And again, having kind of modifications in place or accommodations at work can really make a big difference.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. And our next question relates to the sample again. And this participant is asking, why do you think injured workers under WSIB have a 6 times higher severe persistent pain after 18 months versus people who have not suffered a work-related injury?
So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, 1 in 6 injuries that occur in adult populations happen to individuals who have their injury at work. So it's quite common. And again, to kind of go back to that 6 times number, we're working in a distinct population. Again, everybody in our sample had a work-related injury, and this is different than the general population of Canada, who at the beginning of the presentation, the statistic is about 18.5% report chronic pain. So again, it's the population that we're looking under, but I'd like to emphasize that when we were conducting the study, we were quite surprised to see how high the prevalence of persistent pain is. Again, this is not right after the injury, which we would expect everybody to be in some level of pain. This is 18 months after an injury, and it really goes back to the fact that work-related injuries can be complex, and they can be severe. They can be from a mild injury to a severe injury. And important to note again that about 2/3 of our sample did have a medium or long-term duration claim, which might suggest that their injuries were a little more severe. But we did account for that in our analyses with the reweighting.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, it definitely highlights the complexity of this topic and the variability in this population. One reminder for participants is that if you do have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function. I noticed some people are putting up their hand in the participant group, which is we're going to take questions primarily on the Q&A function. So we ask that you type them in there. The next question is about the nature of the injuries among your participants. And one participant wants to know, do you know how many of your subjects had an acute injury, for instance, like a fall, versus a more gradual onset injury like a musculoskeletal disease? Do you feel that might be an important distinction to consider as you kind of take the next steps in this research?
So a fabulous question, and it's something that we did try and explore in our study. Unfortunately, our nature of injury variable, the information we have, again, is quite broad, and it's at a high level. So we definitely think a next step is to explore, how does the association between the type of injury that occurs, again, whether it's a gradual musculoskeletal injury or a more acute injury, like a fall or something falling on you, is definitely a great place to take this field of research.
Thank you for that. We have another participant who's asking about pain management for workers. And I know this might be something that's out of scope for your specific research area, but I guess related to that question, I guess I'm wondering, like, if you were to kind of sit in a room with a physician who focuses in on pain management, what might be some like key messages that you'd want them to know about that could then help them advance their scope of practice?
So what would I say to a physician to expand their scope of practice? First, I would remind them that individuals who experience a work-related injury, most of them, at least based on our study findings, are going to experience some form of persistent pain. So to start, and I think to help it is for when they first start to see that injured worker, understanding how to start pain management right away, because they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So again, to kind of start it right away, so hopefully over time the amount of pain reduces as well. I would also suggest them to read some of the fantastic information from the Canadian Pain Task Force about primary prevention efforts, secondary prevention or treatment efforts, as well as tertiary treatment efforts. And a third message I would say is to collaborate. Again, pain is a very unique thing, and it's a very personal thing, and it not only has physical aspects but psychological aspects as well. So if the physician feels like something is out of scope for them, trying to connect with other healthcare professionals that could help manage the worker's pain.
Great, and thank you. And I acknowledge that's a challenging question for you to answer, Kathleen, but I definitely appreciate you taking a stab at it. So we have another participant who wants to know more about the potential factors that could also play a role in some of the findings that you've observed. And in particular, what role might biopsychosocial parameters play if you were to account for them in greater detail, as well as to what extent might the type of treatment that a person underwent following their injury play in some of the outcomes that you've observed and the levels of pain in your sample?
So, oh my gosh, everybody in this audience today is asking such great questions. So to start with the biopsychosocial aspect, there's definitely a biopsychosocial aspect to pain. And although we explored some high-level factors, I think an important one to mention is age and gender, or age and sex. Typically, chronic pain increases as we age. So to think about that part of the population, which again, we're seeing in our sample with the average ages being close to 50 in the two pain groups. And secondly, it's quite often that women report experiencing persistent pain greater than men. And whether that's a sex biological thing, or that women are more likely to express what they're feeling with their health status, could be debated for days, and we could be here all day talking about it. And then again, one thing with persistent pain is that it can be quite challenging to experience it. And again, it's invisible. Nobody else can see it. So trying to talk to people about it can be really hard for sufferers. So understanding that there definitely is a psychological component to it is important. And for the social part, it always helps to be around people and to be in communities. So again, I think that brings back the importance of returning to work when a worker is ready, and putting accommodations or modifications in place. So I think that answers the first part of the question. And if you can repeat the second part of the question, I'd be happy to take a stab at that.
Yeah, the second part was related to accounting for the treatment that the participant went through or obtained following their injury, and to what extent that level of treatment might have played a role in the findings that you've highlighted.
Yeah, so we did explore the if participants were seeing healthcare professionals, which most participants in all the groups were, but definitely that increased for the mild and severe pain group. But apart from that, and in our paper, we have some other various statistics about if someone saw multiple healthcare providers, if they were still seeing healthcare providers. I definitely think this is an area for future research, because to understand, and again, everybody's injury and everybody's pain is unique, but to understand about if seeing an individual or a healthcare provider can help individuals with persistent pain, and the type of course of healthcare treatment can be important in reducing pain and also getting workers back to work, that's definitely a modifiable pathway that we can look at and hopefully improve.
Thank you. So another question we have was with regards to measuring the success of return to work. And one participant asked, to what extent could it be possible to attach the pre and post-claim earnings records of the respondents in order to measure their success in return to work?
So what I would say back to that audience member is, how are we defining success? Is defining success based on earnings, which, if it is, again, as a researcher, I look at economic questions, so I'm happy to take a stab at that. Unfortunately, we aren't able to do that in this study because we don't have that information, and if we did, we don't have participant consent to look at it. But it's definitely an important area to look at. But I'd also like to note about other definitions of success. So another definition might be, I'm not in pain anymore at 18 months, or I'm not in pain anymore at 24 months. Is success, I've been able to go back to work at my injury employer that I'm happy at, or is it, I went back to work, it wasn't the right place for me, so I'm now working somewhere else where I'm happy. So again, to define what does success look like, I think is really important for this population.
Okay, thank you. Another question was with regards to potential identification of predictive factors. And one participant asks, were there any predictive factors that could be identified early in the claim process that could be helpful in predicting those who are at the most risk for developing chronic and persistent pain?
So since our study looked at persistent pain measured 18 months after the work-related injury, we don't know too much about what happened in that very acute phase. But I would say probably the biggest factor is the severity of the injury. The more severe and complex the injury, the more likely there is just kind of physiologically to have space for persistent pain. So again, ensuring that all injuries, but especially complex injuries, are dealt with a healthcare team in the immediate term, is to reduce, again, kind of try and prevent chronic pain down the road is quite important.
Okay. Another question we have is with regards to the return to work process again. And this person asks, and sorry, this is a little bit of a longer question. So I'm just trying to synthesize it as in real time. With regards to returning to work, sometimes this might occur prematurely, and as a result, this might actually make things worse. And so this participant wants to know more about kind of this idea of coming to work when you're not ready, and what that might do to the return to work process and to levels of pain that a person might experience. And I guess the kind of the quote that they use is, where are we with the hurt versus harm theory when it comes to listening to injured workers and their perceptions of pain and feeling ready to return to work prematurely?
So I would like to thank the audience member for posing that question or that thought. I will come out and say our study cannot speak to whether a worker who experienced pain went back to work too early or too late, or their experience with that. But in the cohort and other research that the group is doing, we have noted that there are some individuals who reported, you know what, I think I went back to work too early. And that decision is a complex one between the worker, the employer, and the WSIB. And I'm not at a level where I can talk about that. But again, I think framing it as hurt versus harm is important, because again, going back to work increases the potential social circle for a worker who, when being off work, might have felt a little isolated. But at the same time, depending on the work environment and the nature of somebody's work, could lead to an increased risk of subsequent injury or subsequent pain. And again, this goes back to the awareness piece about when a worker is going back to work, really talking with them about where they're at, what they feel comfortable doing in their body, and how can they make the return to work process as smooth as possible. So modifications if necessary, and accommodations if necessary.
Great. Yeah, I guess from your research emerges a lot of more specific questions with regards to the types of modifications that might work. And obviously that becomes a more complex question because it all is often workplace specific. And so related to that, we've had a couple of participants ask about this concept of pain, and not just pain, but the types of limitations that might emerge as a result of pain, right? So it might not just be about acknowledging the pain, but also acknowledging how it impacts one's ability to perform tasks at work. And so maybe could you potentially speak to the concept of what we might see if we were able to measure work limitations in your sample? And did you, or were you able to measure work limitations in your sample? But if not, then how might that play out in the implications of your findings?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of incorporated into how we define pain. Again, we defined it with two metrics: pain interference and pain intensity. Pain intensity was defined as how much pain from your injury are you currently experiencing 18 months after, with 0 being nothing, or no pain, and 10 being the worst pain you ever had. But our first question was pain interference. So in the past month, have you felt like your pain is interfering with your activities of daily living, which includes your ability to work, either at work or at home? And most participants, as we saw by the distribution of our pain groups, we're experiencing at least a little bit of pain interference in their daily lives. So this may suggest that these individuals might not, at the present time, feel like they're in a physical place to go back and do all of their work duties. Although again, I'd like to note that we really are seeing a gradient effect, right? There were some individuals that reported, I'm experiencing no pain at 18 months, and then individuals experiencing mild pain. So yeah, my pain interference is a little bit, or it's moderate, but on the pain intensity scale, my pain is 0 to 5, somewhere in there. And then again, 25% of the sample were reporting severe pain, which is, yeah, it's impacting me extremely or quite a bit, or moderately, but my pain's really intense. So I think kind of diving deep and getting nuanced in these definitions is important to identifying the type of pain or persistent pain workers are experiencing.
Thanks, Kathleen. So the next question talks about kind of implications of some of your findings for those involved in the return to work process, as well as in the workers' compensation system. And the person's asking, based on your findings, when and where in the claim process would it be good to assess perceived pain?
So again, although we look at persistent pain, so pain that's been occurring for at least 3 months, but we measured it at 18 months. I think it's assessing it as soon as possible. Again, getting back to, if we know it's there, how can we mitigate its immediate effects so it doesn't become persistent?
Yeah, great. And kind of a related question that aligns with that. One person who's attending today asks, did you notice any connection to the point an individual indicated they had persistent pain? And they're thinking of workers who might describe intense pain immediately after the injury, and nothing helps to alleviate the pain.
Yeah, so again, the way the study was designed was we contacted workers 18 months after their work-related injury or claim. So these workers had been living with the consequences of their injury for a year and a half. So again, we couldn't ask them about their acute injury or pain from that, or we could have, but there potentially might be bias there. We asked them, today, 18 months after your injury, what are you experiencing? So it's definitely a place that we can improve literature, at least when it comes to kind of the chronic and long-term pain. But there is literature available that explores the acute pain experience after a work-related injury. And if that participant is interested in more, I'm happy to send them some references when we go offline.
Great. And yeah, just in general, just to highlight, Kathleen has invited folks on this call or on this Zoom meeting to definitely connect with her if you have any follow-up questions or if you don't feel like a question has been answered sufficiently. So we have time for about maybe one more question. And so one participant in this Zoom call today is asking, the extent to which you factored pre-existing or developing mental health conditions. And they kind of align with a comment that you made earlier in response to one of the questions that was posed your way, Kathleen, where they see more and more physical injury claims moving to chronic pain conditions, and those that kind of have these more chronic pain conditions are more likely to also report mental health involvement. So maybe you can talk about that intersection between the pre-existing or developing mental health conditions and how that plays a role in maybe some of the findings that you've highlighted today.
So that's a great question, and I'm excited to answer this and kind of end the conversation on it. But the participant is right. For many individuals experiencing chronic pain, they do also report a poor mental health profile, and we saw that in our study when we were looking at the other kind of characteristics of participants at 18 months. We saw those with more severe pain experiencing or reporting more mental distress, and this is something that we would expect to find, again, based on the literature and the nature of chronic pain. Now, when it came to the associations of interest that we were studying, we didn't want to include factors that might occur after the persistent pain in our analyses, because that might bias our effect estimates. So for those individuals reporting pain at 18 months, we didn't want to include that because we don't know which came first. Did the individuals have their injury, experienced poor mental health, and started experiencing more pain? It just gets a little muddy. So what we did was actually control for individuals who reported having a prior mood disorder before their work-related injury. And when doing that and still finding statistically significant associations and strong associations between levels of persistent pain and our return to work outcomes, again, we can be confident in what we found, but also definitely exploring the mental health profile of these workers is a priority for us at the Institute and is something that we'll hopefully be doing moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dobson, for a really thought-provoking presentation today. I'm sure folks who attended today have a lot of questions and maybe some insights that they can bring back to their scope of practice or the work that they do in the field. So thank you so much for presenting today. I just wanted to highlight quickly for those on the Zoom meeting today that our next open speaker series will be held on December 13th at 11 a.m. And the presenter is Dr. Linda Robson, who is our colleague and scientist at the Institute for Work and Health. And they're going to be presenting on preventing falls from heights in construction, a long-term evaluation of Ontario's working at heights training standards. So we hope that you'll all join us for Dr. Robson's presentation on the 13th, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. And if you're in Toronto, beware of the snow because there's a lot of it outside right now. So thanks again, everyone, and take care.